So we got, I know those of you who were at the early service on Sunday got to hear two, I think, fantastic papers that they prepared. Tessa and Addison Meekoff. So we got 3 more to go as far as papers are concerned, and 1 more exam. So
Is this Addison's last year?
for confirmation, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So we have 5 confirmands this year. 2 of them named Addie, 4 of them girls, and 1 boy. So it's a good group. You know, every year the class is a little bit different, just the personality, and this one's been a little bit of a wild ride. It's been a lot of fun. At the same time, and I mean this in all love since I'm putting it out on the internet, right? Deep thinkers for 8th graders, and also very spazzy. I mean, you think I'm bad about tangents like this. Sometimes in class, I'd hear, it was usually a question from this direction, and then a parent going, talk about that later. But it's been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed this group. And so I'm looking forward to their confirmation. And like I said, the 2 girls that presented their papers did a fantastic job. I'm really proud of them. We got 3 more coming, and all of their papers are also pretty good. So, all right, well, let's dive into things here. Continuing with Lamentations. But before we go into today, we're going to give you, right, it's the scariest moment of the class for me, right? It's opening up questions on last week. So any questions you have, hold over. Oh, go ahead.
What did we do last week?
Yeah, right. Well, we covered chapter 1 of Lamentations as it happens. But we're going to see, I mean, so in chapter 1, just some general stuff, right? Kind of laid the foundation, right? Poem, acrostic poems, each chapter. And chapter 3 is going to be a little bit different in an interesting and important way, but that's for next week, right? We're going to talk about why chapter 3 looks a little bit different than the other 4 chapters in the book of Lamentations. But we recognize that each verse begins with one of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet in order, right? So this is poetry. Specifically, it's lament, right? It's crying out. It is in conversation with God. And though God does not speak in the book of Lamentations, and the Lamentations doesn't have great theological insight in a didactic sense into God, we see that the character of God in the relationship is still revealed through Lamentations. We met our 2 characters, if you will, or the 2 voices of the poem. One being Jeremiah, the prophet himself, and the other being Jerusalem, or Zion. And she will appear again today. And then this is the last chapter that Jerusalem personified will speak. And so we'll take a look at what Jerusalem has to say as the conclusion of her vocalizations, if you will. Last week we noted that mostly Jerusalem, but Jeremiah as well, recognized a couple of things in the wake of the disaster in Jerusalem. One is that it was Jerusalem's fault, right? It was as a result of their sinfulness that the destruction happened. And then the other is that the fault of the devastation was on the people, on Jerusalem, but the cause of the devastation was not the Babylonians, at least not directly. The cause of the devastation was God himself. This week, with chapter 2, I was telling Steve, this might be the hardest chapter to deal with in the book of Lamentations. Because in this chapter, both Jeremiah and Jerusalem kind of still have that tacit recognition that sin was a part of what happened. But in this chapter, they go on the attack against God for what has happened. And we'll kind of get into a little bit more as we read through, but less of a, I have sinned, therefore you chastised me, or punished me, right? Because even chastised wasn't in the language of chapter 1. In this chapter, it's kind of a memory of I have sinned, and God, you went overboard. That is the implication through this chapter. So I think it can be kind of hard for us, right? Because of course, nothing bad ever happens. Everything's good. God's always happy and good and nice and right. And if anything ever goes the other way, we kind of close our eyes and pretend it's not happening. Well, Lamentations doesn't do that. We already have, but especially today, we're going to kind of go full force into some deeply human emotions in the face of suffering. But that's what we did last week, and a little bit of a pointing us into this chapter as well. Any other questions, comments, or thoughts on any of this? All right. Something that I think is probably worthwhile just to kind of mention here. We talk about this when, or I kind of deal with this when talking about, like death and resurrection, and I've done that teaching. Don't say heaven, say eschatological reality, and all things, all that kind of stuff. Those are conversations you have when people are not at a funeral. Right? That's not the time to have the conversations, right? So in many ways, I'm making an assumption here that none of you are going through deep suffering at the moment. I mean, you might be, but for those of us that are not actively in the midst of suffering, a study of Lamentations is helpful, right? Not because we can see ourselves immediately in the position, but so that we kind of have a toolkit for when we are, right? Suffering is a part of life. It just is, right? What is it? Oh, I know it's the Dread Pirate Roberts who says it, right? Life is pain, princess. Anyone who says otherwise is trying to tell you something, right? Where is that from? Princess Bride, absolutely. Right before she shoves him off a hill and then finds out she's in love with him, right? Great movie. But suffering exists in this world. And so a study of Lamentations kind of helps us prepare ourselves so that when we do encounter suffering, we have more in our arsenal, if you will, than like Professor Lessing said last week, anemic prayers where we just kind of say, thy will is done, and we shut everything else down and just trudge on with our life, right? And today especially, we're going to kind of deal with those sorts of things. So, chapter 2, just some kind of background information as we, or before we actually do start reading into it. Again, chapter 2 has 2 speakers, both Jeremiah and Zion or Jerusalem, though unlike chapter 1, it's far less, conversational is not quite the right word for chapter 1, but you get a back and forth between Jeremiah and Jerusalem. Not so today. Today we're going to have, I think it's, 19 verses of, around that of Jeremiah talking, and then Jerusalem only speaks right at the end. And so it's mostly Jeremiah speaking, and Jeremiah kind of changes the direction partway through. So he starts out with his continuing lament and dirge, and then he transitions into speaking to Jerusalem. He addresses Jerusalem, and then Jerusalem responds to that, and then it's the last we hear from Jerusalem, or from Jerusalem specifically. References to sin, as I mentioned, are minimal and are very much in the background. There is still the recognition that the destruction is a result of the sin of Jerusalem. But while that motif, if you will, played a major role in chapter 1, in chapter 2, it's background at best. This chapter deals more with Day of the Lord imagery, right? So let's take a step back here. Day of the Lord stuff. Now, Miriam gets out of this one because she hasn't been in my class that long, but the rest of you have been in for a while. So when we say Day of the Lord in the Old Testament, what are we talking about?
When God intervenes in history directly.
Last day, more generally, right? We got when God intervenes in the world directly. Good. That's almost straight out of my notes, the definition. Well done. And we see that one of these places that God intervenes in the world is the last day, right? And so there's definitely this kind of push in our minds through to the last day. But when the prophets, and when it's brought up in the New Testament as well, the day of the Lord, is that all it refers to? Is this final day? Or is there more? Well, if the day of the Lord is the day that God, or the time when God directly and personally intervenes in the world, I can think of one other. Jesus is a pretty significant day of the Lord, right? Where God incarnates himself into the world, right? And while you can kind of say the entire earthly ministry of Jesus, really we're pushing towards Holy Week stuff, right? And I would say that between those two, between Holy Week, specifically, right, the death to resurrection of Jesus, and the last day, that's kind of this main thrust of the Day of the Lord, right? But are there others?
What about AD 70?
Okay, AD 70, that's an interesting one.
Yep.
What happens, James, in AD 70?
Bad stuff to Jerusalem.
Bad stuff to Jerusalem, you are correct. But for the sake of clarity, since this whole book is also about bad stuff happening to Jerusalem,
Destruction of the temple.
it's a destruction of which temple? Because again, not to be really pedantic here, but that also applies to Lamentations as well.
This is Solomon's temple.
This is Solomon's temple. What about the 70 AD? What's going on with that temple?
It's Herod's temple.
Calling it Herod's temple is interesting. You're not wrong. We typically call it the Second Temple. It's the one that Ezra built specifically, but now you're looking so unconfident. You shouldn't. You're right.
AD 70 would be the third temple, isn't it?
No, there isn't a third temple.
Well, the
Well,
one
what
that
is
Herod built was
Solomon?
supposed to be.
This is not about Lamentations at all, but it's really fascinating. So what's going on here? Hold on. How many temples are there? Right? Well, you might say that it is the third temple if you're counting the tabernacle, but that's one of my own soapboxes, and we're not doing that.
Solomon built one.
Solomon built one. What happened to Solomon's temple? By? Not the Romans. By the Babylonians. That's what, and that's directly the antecedent of Lamentations. Good. Who built the second temple? Okay, Zerubbabel was the governor at the time. Ezra is also, he's the priest that's involved with that. Yep. But Zerubbabel, look, we got some Haggai, Malachi stuff going on. Woo. Oh, well, I mean, you're right. That's good stuff.
Just saying Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi.
Right. So there.
that was the second temple.
What happened in the second temple?
They expanded it.
Bingo.
Oh, okay.
It is still there when Jesus is walking around. It's the same temple, right? This is, now, a lot of dramatic stuff has happened there, including the Maccabees, right? And Hanukkah and all of that. That happens in the second temple in the intertestamental period. The Seleucids start sacrificing pigs on the altar. That happens before Hanukkah, though it's why Hanukkah happens. And then, like Pilate put a gold eagle up on the front door and almost caused a riot, or not almost, did cause a riot that almost got him and a lot of people killed. There's been some drama, but why is it also Herod's temple? It's because Herod, why is Herod called Herod the Great? Look, we're taking another step back. Because he wasn't a good guy, right? No one thought he was good. His wife and kids didn't think he was good. He killed a few of them, right? So why is it called Herod the Great?
There was a couple Herods though, right?
There were a lot of Herods, not even a couple. It's a nightmare when you're starting to do like early like history after Jesus. It's like, oh, then there's this Herod, who's the brother of Herod, who's the uncle of Herod, and this Herod doesn't like that. It's a nightmare. They're all named Herod.
Is it tetrarch?
Yep, he is a tetrarch, right? That just means that he's in charge. He's one of three kings that rule over three small little areas at the pleasure of Rome, right? That's why Herod's in charge, because it is Herod the Great goes and he takes a trip to Rome while the Hasmoneans still exist, and he kind of says, "Hey, can I please have Jerusalem? I'll be your best friend." And they say yes, and then Rome does Rome's thing, and now Herod's in charge. Herod the Great is called Herod the Great because he was a builder. He built a lot. The Herodian, which is a massive palace complex, is one of his major accomplishments. His greatest accomplishment is Caesarea Philippi. He built an entire port city that was, again, massive. And then he also, as part of his building projects, adds on and does refurbishments to the temple. So the second temple and Herod's temple are the same building. It's kind of like if we said, this is the first river cliff, if you will, right? It was just that building. And then second river cliff was the hallway expansion. And then third river cliff was the narthex. Like, well, or you could even say it's like, this is the river cliff of Pastor Jeff Jordan, right? Because he was the senior when the narthex got added. It's like, well, it's still the same building, right? But expansion projects, that kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Yes. How did they do the Holy of Holies then? Because I thought
that wasn't, so they built on the same building. Like they didn't demo.
So what did they do with the Holy of Holies in one temple? Because I'm assuming it was not the same in Herod's temple.
No, it was. So most of what Herod did was expand the courtyard complex. He did renovations and repairs on the main temple building, but most of what Herod did was the courtyard.
And the Holy of Holies did not have an Ark of the Covenant.
Right, there's also that.
Right.
Right, because the Babylonians took it away, and it's gone. And then when does this temple get destroyed? 70 AD. Who destroys it? The Romans, right? I think it was specifically Vespasian or Titus. I can never remember. There's a transition there. But, they destroy it in 70 AD. And this is specifically what Jesus is talking about whenever he mourns over Jerusalem as he's coming, right? Jerusalem, right? All of that. And
not one stone left and not another.
right, and all of those kinds of prophecies and comments, those are about the coming destruction of the Roman Empire to wipe out. Yes, they destroyed the temple. They also destroyed most of Jerusalem. It was a repeat of the Babylonians. Of course, just because I can't help myself, right? That's known as the Great Revolt. Or the Jewish Revolt is the biggest one. It's not the last one. There's two more. One's called the Second Jewish Revolt, and it's extremely insignificant. Almost nothing happens. And then you have the last big one. There's other little ones in between. The last big one's called the Bar Kokhba Rebellion, where Simon Bar Kokhba, which means Simon, son of the star, says I'm the Messiah, a la the Zealots, and tries to overthrow Rome. That's the one that gets the Jewish people kicked out for good, where they are no longer allowed to be present in Jerusalem or Galilee. They are expelled, 100%, basically. And then the rest of it is a senior Bible study class that I did a year ago, and we can talk about the rest of the history of what is at that point called Palestine, because that's what the Romans changed the name to after they wrecked the temple. It's no longer Judea, it's now Palestine. But that's another huge cataclysmic Day of the Lord event, right? So when we see Day of the Lord in the prophets, we have something that we kind of got to deal with. Moving myself over on the camera there. Look at that. Multimedia. When the prophets talk about the day of the Lord, they make no distinctions between any of these, right? And so one way to think of it is you got yourself here, right? And then the prophets talk about the day of the Lord, and it kind of looks like mountains and valleys, right? And so they're talking about the day of the Lord here, here, and here, right? So let's just say this is Babylon, this is the cross, and this is the end, right? So final judgment. And when the prophets look, they see all of these as one unit, right? They don't know that there's a valley in between. They don't get the depth perception, right? This is why it's going to be coming up here in a couple of weeks again, liturgically. This is why I think that we need to give the disciples credit right before the ascension, right? Everyone gives them a hard time, right? Because what did the disciples say to ask Jesus right before he ascends into heaven?
When you come into your glory or something?
Right. Is now the time? Are you coming into your glory now? Right? It's been 40 days. Like, what are we waiting for here? Right? So is now the time? Is that, and everyone says, oh, dumb disciples, right? Is that an unreasonable thing for them to think? No, because from where they're standing, which is like right here, right? They don't know that there's this gap that is 2,000 plus years in between the cross day of the Lord and the final day of the Lord when Jesus comes into his glory, right? They don't recognize that there's a gap. And it's not because they're being foolish, it's because there's never any indication that there is a gap until some of the last things that Jesus says to them is when they finally kind of get the hint. But, you know, when the church kind of finally figures out that there's a gap in between the two, it's around the year 100 AD. What event happened around that time? I don't know exactly when it happened. That caused the church to kind of finally, officially go, oh, we got another period of waiting.
John died.
John died. Why is that a big deal?
He was the last one.
So he was the last disciple. So that's its own big deal. That caused its own thing. But there's something else.
Jesus said that
What is
some around here, some of you standing here
Mhm.
will be able to see that. Yeah.
Right. What Jesus says, if you run Occam's razor through it, right? You guys know Occam's razor? So you hear hoofbeats, you think horses, not zebras, right? The simplest answer is probably the right one, is that when Jesus says, some of you will not die until that day, well, probably John's going to live to see the final consummation of Jesus' power. And then he died. And then the church kind of had to go, okay, that's not what that meant. Now let's figure out what it means. And right, most people kind of take this to mean that Jesus is going to give John the vision of Revelation, which kind of points to this. Right? I mean, that's the most common thing I've heard. I don't know if you have any other insights into that.
Is that when he said, what is it, who did he say? Was it to Peter or who he said, what is it to you if I should have this man stay until I return? Was that John
Yeah.
he was talking about?
Yeah, so Peter,
So they think if John dies, okay, he's coming back.
well, John can't die until he comes back. In fact,
Oh.
they're a heretical group, but the Mormon church teaches that John is not dead. And that John's kind of wandering around in a cave somewhere. Because Jesus said he won't die until Jesus returns. And so right, but that's how they take it,
What
right?
is it to you if?
Yes, and there's also this element of, Peter's, by the way, I think Peter and John didn't like each other. I think they bickered a lot, right? Every year around Easter, there's jokes all over the place on social media about how John wrote in his gospel, inspired by the Holy Spirit, that he ran faster than Peter. I saw one joke, it was good. It was a little skit two guys did, and they're writing, and John's writing it, and Peter's like, come on, John, you have to put that in. And it ended with John saying, what, you going to deny that too, Peter? And then, pretty good. Anyway,
They both wanted to be the favorite.
Right. Yeah. But we see this day of the Lord element that is going to come up in today's. It is when God intervenes directly in the world. It's usually pretty cataclysmic. With it comes judgment. It also with it comes salvation, right? We saw this in Joel, right? Especially, it was particularly poignant in Joel, where Joel talks about how, it's Joel that has the swords into plowshares backwards, where he says that they'll beat their plowshares into swords and their pruning hooks into spears. And it's God's enemies, where God is going to kind of rile them up so he can wipe them out. And so this is, if you're one of the enemies of God, bad, right? Just what Jerusalem was. But if you're one of the faithful, then this is good, right? Because your enemies are gone. You don't need to worry about them anymore. It's salvation for you, even though it's judgment for those outside of the faith, right? And so this is one of the ways that the Babylonian captivity is described as this great and terrible day of the Lord. And what we're seeing in Lamentations here is people living through that moment, right? In a very cataclysmic way, right? And for us to kind of say, oh, well, but I'm not living through Jerusalem while it's being annihilated. Remember, there's another aspect of the day of the Lord, right? And, well, you guys, any of you know, how is the day of the Lord a very personal thing?
When a man wants to die, and then the judgment.
Right. So, we kind of talk about this sometimes, right? Well, I might not still be alive when Jesus returns for the final judgment, right? And you kind of get this, thief coming in the middle of the night sort of stuff. And you get the sense of, oh, well, I don't need to worry about that, right? Because it's probably, right, statistically, probably not going to happen to me, right? Well, guess what? In the moment of your death, that you face judgment, right? Your day of the Lord comes in one of two ways. Either at the moment of your death or when Christ returns, if you're still alive, right? Either way, the day of the Lord is something very real to us, right? And, well, not quite the same day of the Lord aspect. Even looking at the world around us right now, the cataclysms that accompany the day of the Lord happen somewhat regularly in this world, right? I mentioned that that Dr. Lessing had a whole litany. We could do them right now, right? For people in Iran at the moment, and Ukraine, and there's a couple places in Africa currently too. It may as well, right? Cataclysm and destruction is here right now. In many ways, this is COVID, right? COVID was interesting as far as pandemics go, but still, we kind of had questions, right, that kind of accompanied this sort of thing. In fact, Dr. Lessing does talk about COVID very briefly in his commentary, because he wrote it just after COVID, and just after he was kind of dealing with, teaching students in the midst of a pandemic. And he teaches like Jeremiah and Lamentations, and they go, hey, hold on, some of this kind of looks familiar, right? And so it comes to us personally, and these are just big ways, right? How many personal life, family tragedies happen, and we are in one way or another back into this kind of living through calamity sort of situation, right? And so here we have Jeremiah giving us voice for that. Well, I'll tell you what, one other thing just to mention before we hit chapter 2 and start reading it. For all of Lamentations, but especially chapter 2, it's helpful for us to remember the biblical context in which this happens, right? And I'm not talking about Jerusalem just got wiped out. This is coming in the wake of the pre-exilic prophets, right? The destruction of Jerusalem did not come out of nowhere, right? I mean, Jeremiah spends basically his whole book trying to prevent it from happening, right? He is trying to warn people to repent, right, and to turn back. Micah, Joel, I mean, the whole slew of the pre-exilic prophets are calling Israel, calling Judah in this particular case, to repentance, right? And they're warning that if the repentance doesn't happen, judgment will be coming, right? We now have seen the reality of that judgment. But what else do these pre-exilic prophets all point towards? They warn of judgment, but what else?
Restoration.
They promise restoration, right? Zephaniah is a great example of this. In Zephaniah 1 through this 1 and 2 and the first half of 3, it's all warning about the coming destruction. And then the last half of chapter 3 is some of my favorite Old Testament verses in the whole Bible, because it talks about how God will take the people that he scattered and gather them back together, and he's going to sing and rejoice over them. And it's a beautiful picture. It's one of my go-to deathbed devotions. And the idea that we have here in the midst of this in Lamentations is, just as these prophets were right about the coming destruction, they are also right about the coming restoration. If they're right about one thing, they're going to be right about the other, right? And so we need to kind of keep that in the back of our minds as a backdrop of Lamentations chapter 2. All right. Questions on the background stuff before we actually start reading the Bible, which is a good thing. Cool. Tell you what, I want to get through the first 10 verses since they're all kind of a unit. Let's split it up into 2. So I have a volunteer for 1 through 5. Thank you, Tom. And 6 through 10. Not all at once, though. Thank you, Mark. All right.
How the Lord has covered her daughter of Zion with a cloud in his anger. He has cast from heaven to earth the glory of Israel, and has not remembered his footstool in the day of his anger. The Lord has swallowed up, he has not spared all the habitations of Jacob. In his wrath he has thrown down the strongholds of the daughter of Judah. He has brought them down to the ground. He has profaned the kingdom and its princes. In fierce anger, he has cut off all the strength of Israel. He has drawn back his right hand from before the enemy, and he has burned in Jacob like a flaming fire, consuming round about. He has bent his bow like an enemy. He has set his right hand like an adversary, and slain all that were pleasant to the eye. In the tent of the daughter of Zion, he has poured out his wrath like fire. The Lord has become like an enemy. He has swallowed up Israel. He has swallowed up all the palaces. He has destroyed its strongholds and multiplied in the daughter of Judah mourning and moaning.
Mark, verse almost.
He has laid waste his booth like a garden, laid in ruins his meeting place. The Lord has made Zion forget festival and Sabbath, and in his fierce indignation has spurned king and priest. The Lord has scorned his altar, disowned his sanctuary. He has delivered into the hand of the enemy the walls of her palaces. They raised a clamor in the house of the Lord, as on the day of festival. The Lord determined to lay in ruins the wall of the daughter of Zion. He stretched out the measuring line. He did not restrain his hand from destroying. He caused rampart and wall to lament. They languished together. Her gates have sunk into the ground. He has ruined and broken her bars. Her king and princes are among the nations. The law is no more, and her prophets find no vision from the Lord. The elders of the daughter of Zion sit on the ground in silence. They have thrown dust on their heads and put on sackcloth. The young women of Jerusalem have bowed their heads to the ground.
All right, so back to the cheery stuff of Lamentations, right? So here, a couple of things that I just want to kind of highlight for us, rather than kind of just digging through verse by verse with the imagery, which we could do. I want to highlight a few things and then kind of move on to, honestly, something of a discussion surrounding this section here. So verses 1 through 10 here are in the commentary labeled Jeremiah's dirge. I don't know what the difference between a dirge and a lament is. The commentary clearly sees one, but I've honestly probably skipped that part in his introduction, if I'm honest with you. And so he identifies this as Jeremiah's dirge. It centers on, as you noticed, God's destructive actions. He uses, and here, I did look at this, it's your $10 Jeopardy word. He makes heavy use of metonym, right? Which is a literary device where you describe a part to include the whole. And so when he talks, a good example of this is when he says, the gates, right, beginning of verse 9, her gates have sunk into the ground, he has ruined and broken her bars. We should understand that to mean there are no walls around Jerusalem anymore. They're all gone, right? But he's only describing one portion, right? And he does this in 3 areas. One is the city and its people are all gone. The second is the palace and government. And the third is the temple and covenant worship, right? He came up twice in those 10 verses. The idea of this day of the festival, right? Where, and it's going to come up again in a very pointed and barbed way right at the end of the chapter as well. This idea of, right, why was Jerusalem so important? We talked about it a little bit last week. Why was Jerusalem so important to Judah and Israel?
At the temple.
It had the temple, which meant, just from a really practical political standpoint, what needed to happen every year?
Oh, the Passover.
Yeah, and what do you do with the Passover? You go to the temple, right? And so there's an annual pilgrimage to Jerusalem. There's a whole section of the book of Psalms dedicated to that pilgrimage. They're the Psalms of Ascent, by the way. They start at 120, and they go for a number after that I don't remember. But I only know 120 because it's after 119, which is the really long one, right?
Yeah.
But these are the psalms that the people would sing to each other as they ascended up the hill to Jerusalem, and most specifically to the temple. It's a fantastic unit of psalms, by the way. It's one of my favorites. If I ever do a psalm study, that's probably where I'm going to start. Unless I really feel like going down the Lamentations route, we do the imprecatories, but that is probably not going to happen, or at least not for a while. We need something cheerier before we get into those. But, right, the gathering of the festival, this is a joyful occasion where all God's people come back together, right? Are joined around the Passover in this sense, right? I'm over here almost saying the word supper, right? Joined around the Passover where they remember what? Where the day of the Lord happened.
Yeah.
And they were delivered from the hands of their enemies, right? And Jeremiah here is playing on this idea. We almost see what God has done here as the way Dr. Lessing puts it is the Exodus undone, right? God gathered his people all together. He destroyed not the Egyptians, but them, and then brought them out of that land. That was the land that they were supposed to go to, right? And sent them away so that they could be slaves again, right? In a land that is not their own. And so we see Jeremiah kind of playing with this idea of the festival and this covenant worship as, well, now it's all undone, right? This is a overpouring of grief at the consequences of, taking the bigger picture in sight, of the consequences of the sin of Jerusalem, the sin of God's people, right? And, the palace and government, right? The king, the Davidic line is gone, right? It's done. It's destroyed, right? Now, is the Davidic line actually gone?
No.
No. How many are left?
One.
Yeah, basically one, right? I don't know exactly how many are left.
Jesus.
Well, not Jesus, not yet. He's coming.
That's who I-
But
right.
no, we're looking here at Zechariah. No, that's not it. Anyway, his name's escaping me right now.
Well, Zerubbabel,
There we go. Thank you. Zerubbabel is
he's in the line.
right. So he's kind of one down. Zerubbabel was in Jerusalem when this happened, right? His dad got bad things happened to his dad, but he makes it through.
So I'm trying to picture this. So do we think that Jeremiah wrote this while he was sitting in the ruins of Jerusalem? Or did he write it sometime later, remembering what it was like?
So that is a good question. He doesn't give us a direct connection. Let's turn back. You should have asked this last week. I had it written down when I needed to go. I think it's like around Jeremiah 45. More judgment. This is after. Gedaliah murdered. Okay, 39 is the fall of Jerusalem. And so we're not going to read through this. This is the fall of Jerusalem. This is Jeremiah 39. So Zedekiah, that's the name I was looking for. Jeremiah gets thrown in the cistern, right? And where he sinks down into the mud. And then someone convinces the king it's probably not a good idea. So they fish him out and throw him in prison in the palace, right? And then look at 39. We're going to start with verse 11, and I will read a little section here, right? So this is after Jerusalem's gone, right? Babylon has breached the walls at least, right? But it's not gone just yet. Babylon is through the walls. Verse 11 of chapter 39. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, gave command concerning Jeremiah through Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, saying, "Take him, look after him well, and do him no harm, but deal with him as he tells you." So Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, Nebuchadnezzar, and, oh man, I usually do this to you, not to me, Rabsarius, Nergal, Saul-Ezer, the Rabmag, and all the chief officers of the king of Babylon sent and took Jeremiah from the court of the guard. They entrusted him to Gedaliah, the son of Achim, son of Zaphan, that he should take him home, and he lived among the people, right? So Jeremiah is taken out of Jerusalem for the active destruction. He then eventually gets moved down to Egypt and some other places as well, but he stays in the area. What I have seen, and I don't know where I saw this, but so I have no idea the veracity of it, but I've seen somewhere that there's this thought that he kind of is writing it on a hillside, watching smoke come up from Jerusalem.
What's the Septuagint?
Septuagint.
Yeah. It said that Lamentations opened by identifying the work of Jeremiah. After Israel has gone into captivity and Jerusalem laid waste, Jeremiah sat weeping and said, and then...
Oh, there we go. So, the Septuagint, by the way, is the Greek translation of the Old Testament. Well, there we go. That's somewhere in the past I have seen that or something. So I get the sense that this is pretty wrong.
So he saw it, but he wasn't sitting right in the middle of it.
We don't know for sure, right? I mean, so they take him out of the city.
Yeah.
Right? Why do they take him out?
Well, they're protecting him.
Why do they need to protect him?
They're killing everybody.
So that some random soldier didn't just murder him in the street, because that's what they were doing. So they pull him out, right? Nebuchadnezzar sends his captain of the guard, the guy in charge of the siege, sends him in, says, "Go get Jeremiah, pull him out so that he's safe." right? Because unless you're a Babylonian, it is no longer safe, right? Jeremiah is. This is what happens to. I'm pointing at you like you have any idea what I'm talking about. Not Palermo, Sicily. The guy, Greek guy with the. With the laser beam, trying to sound like crazy. Anyway. I'm not actually crazy. There is an actual guy I'm thinking of. He was a Greek inventor and philosopher. And when Syracuse, one of those cities in Sicily, it gets overrun, and the king that's taking over the city says, "Go get this guy," whose name I don't remember. He discovers like density and stuff like that. Man,
Archimedes?
thank you. The screw. Yes, Archimedes. See, I'm not crazy. This is not proof that I am crazy. Archimedes, they say, go get Archimedes and pull him out because the dude's really smart. And by the time the actual guard gets there, he's dead because some random soldier saw his stuff, thought it looked like his stuff, and killed Archimedes on the way to go grab it. That's how he dies. And so Nebuchadnezzar wants to avoid stuff like this. This is not an uncommon thing. If you got someone that you know is in the city that you want, after you breach the walls, you get them out as fast as possible. So again, some random soldier doesn't just kill him on a whim. Or her, I suppose. Thank you. Archimedes, that's what's happened.
Did Nebuchadnezzar know that Jeremiah is a prophet of the Hebrew God?
Yes.
I thought so.
And so why?
That's why he wanted him. He wanted to, because he knew that God was powerful.
Maybe.
Like he kind of believed.
I don't think.
He didn't deny.
Nebuchadnezzar in the book of Daniel is a whole different story, right? And that happens much later.
Okay.
Why would Nebuchadnezzar say, "Go get that guy"? Why would he do it?
To keep the peace with the people that he's bringing.
Oh, he is not worried about that. He's actively slaughtering them, right? And not only that, they didn't like Jeremiah anyway.
Oh.
They had plenty of prophets that they liked, right? And they get mentioned. So why would Nebuchadnezzar want Jeremiah? Let's assume it's not because he's so devout. And let's assume also he does not care about public opinion. So why would he get him?
Because he collected wise men and do so.
So he did, but why Jeremiah specifically? Because he gets singled out. Now the wise men do get collected. Well, okay, so when you're a soldier, right? You've just broken down the wall, right? You've been living in a pit for 2 years. Mud, it's gross, it's nasty, you've been hungry, there's disease everywhere for 2 years. This is what it's like outside of the city wall, right? And you finally get in, and you get to take anything you want, right? Because it's yours now. You take stuff. What else do you take?
Somebody that they're going to want back in the palace.
You take slaves and captives, right? Because they're worth money. People are worth money too, right? And so they would have, getting a court official or something like that, that was good. Because, or a wise man in this case. That was good because you could give them to the king as a gift, and then guess what? Maybe the king will give you a whole bunch of other stuff, right? Or you can be like, hey, look at this wise person I stole, right? They're mine now. I will sell them to you, right? I mean, slavery is a part of this whole process, right? But why single out Jeremiah, right?
Israel's God was talking to him.
Israel's God was talking to him, and what was Jeremiah saying?
Babylon.
Submit to Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar is God's instrument, and he is he's going to take control of Jerusalem, right? As much as the people of Jerusalem hated Jeremiah, because his message to them was one of coming destruction. It was true, but it was one of coming destruction. That was great news for Nebuchadnezzar. Now he has a wise man, a prophet of his God that is in communication with Nebuchadnezzar in some way, who is on his side. And so Nebuchadnezzar says, go get him. I want Jeremiah. He's a high enough value of an individual that the king's going to say, I want him specifically. Right? And it's because of Jeremiah's prophecies. absolutely.
He was saying what he wanted to do.
Yeah, yeah, he was. It worked out well for him, right? And then Daniel comes along and says, guess what? You get to go be a cow for a little while, right? Daniel's a weird book, man. Daniel, by the way, has always been considered a weird book, forever. But we're still in Lamentations. We're not there yet. So we see the city, that holy, promised city, right? The city of David is gone. The people and the Davidic line, the government, the Davidic line is wiped out, right? Now, again, we know it's not quite, it will be restored ultimately to bring Jesus forth, right? And also the temple and the covenant worship, that's all gone too, right? Exodus undone. Who is the cause of this?
Jewish people.
Well, let's narrow it down here just to chapter 2.
Priests.
The priest. Who is blamed in chapter 2? God, right? Look at verse 4 is where it kind of really, 4 and 5. He has bent his bow like an enemy. This sounds a lot like the Psalms that David writes, right? Where God's bending his bow against the enemies of his people. Well, now that bow is pointed at Jerusalem, or was pointed at Jerusalem, right? With his right hand set like a bow. And he has killed all who were delightful in our eyes. And the tent of the daughter of Zion, he's poured out his fury like fire. The Lord has become like an enemy, right? And then he swallows up, right? Jeremiah directly says this was caused by God, right? And that God is, and here's where I kind of want to get some discussion going, even though that's not my style, we'll figure it out. God is the enemy, right? I have a book on my shelf that I have not read that is titled "When God Becomes My Enemy." Maybe I should read it for this, but anyway, I don't know where it came from either. I'm always suspicious if I don't remember where a book came from. But how do we deal with this? How do we react when God becomes our enemy? And I'm not gonna do that. Let's all circle up and you can talk about a time when God became. No, we don't need to do that, right? But when God becomes our enemy, how do we deal with this?
It's not a fight you're going to win.
Okay, so we recognize that it's not a fight we're going to win. And so let's take some cues from Jeremiah and from what we know about the situation at large, right? Not just chapter 2 here. How does Jeremiah deal with this? This, by the way, is not intended to be an easy series of questions, right? This is kind of the meat and potatoes of Lamentations.
Well, he acknowledges what has happened, that he's angry with God, but I always tell my kids and tell myself God has broad shoulders. I can get angry at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we kind of get a little bit, the parallels to Job are significant throughout this book, right? Both Job and Zion, Jeremiah are suffering, right? And who's the cause of both of their sufferings? This is why people don't like the book of Job. Who's the cause of Job's suffering? God, right? Remember all those good-for-nothing friends?
Yeah.
Part of the reason they're good for nothing is they're telling Job, God didn't do this. And Job is saying, no, he really did. And God says, yeah. Right? And what's the reason God gives Job that he caused the suffering in Job's life? Yeah, he used Satan to do it. I get that, right? But from the book of Job, what's the answer? Why does God cause Job to suffer?
None of your business.
It's none of your business. I'm God, you're not. You don't get to ask questions like that, right? Man, Job is such a wild book. I got to teach it when you guys did it in the 2-year series, and so I listened through it all straight in one go, and I recommend it. By the way, that's a good idea for any book of the Bible. Just try listening to it all in one run. Because things will pop up that don't regularly. But yeah, Job for like 40 chapters is like, no, God did this to me. I didn't deserve it, and I want my day in court. He says, I want it, right? His lament is, who's going to serve the subpoena, right? I deserve it, but who's going to make God come down so that I can confront him? And then, Job blinks and God says, I'm right here, let's go, right? We don't get that in Lamentations, but we still get this very similar recognition that, all suffering is at the hand, here is at the hand of, or is from the hand of God. This, by the way, got things occurring in my mind, is not unique to these two books, right? Bonus Bible trivia. What's David's last big screw up? And it's only his last one because he died shortly after. Which means it's not Bathsheba. That was like in the middle.
Numbering the army.
Yeah, so he's doing this census thing, right? What happens?
Three really bad choices.
Yeah, God gives him 3 really bad choices, right? So God says, David, you screwed up again. Here are the consequences. Pick, right? What's David's answer? You know what? Actually, instead of just doing this by memory, let's go to 2 Samuel, which is before those books that I was just looking at. It's right at the end of 2 Samuel.
Chapter 24.
Yep. All right. It's chapter 24, so it's the last chapter of the book, starting with verse 10. I'm just going to start reading, but that's where I'm going, right? But David's heart struck him after he numbered the people, and David said to the Lord, I have sinned greatly in what I have done. But now, O Lord, please take away the iniquity of your servant, for I have done very foolishly. Quick sidebar. This is why David's a man after God's own heart. David is not a good person. I mean, if you want more on that, we can talk after class, and I'll give you the rundown of why David's not a good person. But he's a man after God's own heart, and he's one of the most godly men in the Bible because he's always repenting and recognizing his sin, and he doesn't try to hide from it. So that's good. And when David arose in the morning, the word of the Lord came to the prophet Gad, David's seer, saying, Go and say to David, Thus says the Lord, 3 things I offer you. Choose one of them that I may do it to you. Right? I can't even imagine. That was So Gad came to David and told him and said to him, Shall 3 years of famine come to you in your land? Or will you flee 3 months before your foes while they pursue you? Or shall there be 3 days pestilence in your land? Now consider and decide what answer I shall return to him who sent me. Right? All right.
Did you say how many years of famine?
3 years of famine, 3 months
So
of...
7 years of famine. 13.
I have a footnote on that.
Compare First Chronicles 21.
So the Septuagint says 7. So, it's a Greek translation. What's the reason yours is different is you use a different translation. What's the translation?
American Standard.
Yes, that one must... Yeah, we're on a tangent. How many tangents do we want to go on? Different translations weigh different source material differently. So that one clearly goes with... Yeah, that one clearly is leaning with the Septuagint, whereas this one's probably leaning with...
The Hebrew is 7.
The Hebrew is 7. So where'd 3 come from?
I think it's Septuagint.
Oh, okay. I misread that. I misread that footnote.
It says Septuagint, Hebrew 7.
Okay, but you see that semicolon?
Yeah, I do.
What that means is the Septuagint says what's in the body of the text. The Hebrew text says 7. So there we go. So that one favors the Hebrew, not the... See, these footnotes can be difficult to deal with, even when you know what's going on with them, right?
3 and 3 is why
Right, yeah.
some translations go.
Favor it, yeah. So, what's David to do, right? Then David said to Gad, I am in great distress. Yeah, understatement, right? Let us fall into the hand of the Lord. For his mercy is great, but let me not fall into the hand of man, right? So David has 3 options. One of them is human enemies are going to come and he's going to have to flee from them. Which one does David pick? He doesn't really pick either of them. He says, as long as it's not humans, right? Because David knows what humans are like. He says, let me fall into God's hands, right? So it's famine or pestilence, I don't care, but let God be the one doing it.
Is it fair to say he said, I can't pick God, your will be done?
Not
really.
There's an element of that. I mean, I don't know. Part of me also wondered. So I think sometimes we can assign a lot of piety to people. And I think that there's certainly piety here. I also kind of wonder, I mean, look back at David's life, right? He spent like 20 years running from Saul. And then he spent like however long Absalom's rebellion was running from him. I think David's also kind of just sick of running from people. I mean, if we're not going to assign him too much piety, I mean, I don't know. But the key here is he says, God, I want you to be the one to punish, right? From your hand, I want the suffering to come. Why? What's David's reason?
Because God has mercy.
Because God's merciful, right? Even in the midst of suffering. Now, Jeremiah and Jerusalem, they don't feel that way right now, right? But they are there is this recognition, right? David is right here in the midst of it. And he says, right, God, I want you to be my enemy. Right? It's not what he says, but it's a different kind of way of looking at it through the lens of Lamentations, right? God, I want you to be my enemy. Because you are, even as an enemy, you are still merciful, right? And by the way, what happens? Well, I'll just read it. So the Lord sent a pestilence on Israel from the morning until the appointed time, and there died the people from Dan and Beersheba, 70,000 men. And when the angel stretched out his hand towards Jerusalem to destroy it, the Lord relented from the calamity and said to the angel who was working destruction among the people, it is enough now, stay your hand. And the angel of the Lord was by the threshing floor of the Jebusite, whose name I don't want to pronounce. Then David spoke to the Lord when he saw the angel who was striking the people. He said, behold, I have sinned. I have done wickedly with these sheep. What have they done? Please let your hand be against me and against my father's house. By the way, after this, David goes and buys the threshing floor. And what gets built there?
Temple.
The temple, right? And just because, you know what? Just because we're squirming in this class, right? Look to verse 16, right near the end, right? Right. So we have there, and when the angel stretched out his hand, right? And the angel of the Lord by the threshing floor, right? Who's the angel of the Lord? This is the Malach Yahweh.
Yeah, the second person of God.
It's not guaranteed, right? We're not told that specifically, but almost every time we see the Malach Yahweh come up, it's the second person of the Trinity.
Yeah.
And so we even see, right, like I said, we're just making this as uncomfortable as possible, right? We can even see here that perhaps this is the pre-incarnate Christ bringing judgment, right? Which, by the way, when is that going to happen again? It comes the sword that time. Not the second time. The second time was different. It comes the sword to reap and to destroy. And yet, well, let's forget this one for a second. What would happen if Jesus, the angel of the Lord, comes back in the final judgment if this one didn't happen?
Oh.
No mercy. For anyone? No. There's none of it, right? Why? Oh, I flipped back. What David says, right? We're sinful, right? Jerusalem, we recognize that we're in the same boat, right? And yet, before the final judgment, the angel of the Lord becomes flesh, or takes on flesh, and does what?
Dies for our sins.
He dies for our sins.
And resurrect.
Okay, yes. Yeah. Dies and rises from the dead. Look, oh man, look at how I'm bringing this back in. This is impressive. You know it's impressive because I said it. Jesus dies. How How is it that Jesus dies? There are two correct answers here, by the way. Well, what does Jesus say to Pilate? Pilate says, do you not know that I have the power to, your life's in my hand, right? I have power to take your life. What does Jesus say?
He said, no, you're not.
No, you don't, right?
Yeah.
And what does he finish up with? He says, I'm in charge of that, not you, right?
10,000 legions of angels to come, they would.
Yeah, well, so there's that. I don't think he says that there. But one of the places that I think we actually see this actively happening is in the temptation of Jesus, right? Jeff, if I were to kick you out into the wilderness of Israel for 40 days without any food, how would you be doing by the end of it?
Wouldn't be around.
No, now Jesus is hungry. He should be dead, right? But guess what? Hunger can't take him unless Jesus chooses to let it happen, right? So Jesus has to lay down his life, right? So he does that on the cross. That's not what I'm getting at here. How does Jesus die on the cross? Other than he willingly lays down his own life.
He gives up his spirit.
He gives up his spirit. Why does he give up his spirit? What does he say in the garden?
God's will.
Yeah, God's will be done.
God's will be done. This is good. We want this. Back it up a little bit. What does he say before he says, but your will be done?
If there's a way, take this cup away from me.
Take what cup? Going back to the prophets. What
God's
cup?
wrath.
The cup of whose wrath?
God's wrath.
God. I'm going to do the confirmation thing here. God's not a good enough answer here since we're doing Trinity stuff. God the Father, right? So what, and then, right, it says, God the Father, if this is your will, take the cup of wrath, your wrath, away from me, right? But not my will, but yours be done, right? So, when Jesus is on the cross, he is doing what? Drinking the cup of the wrath of the Father. The Father has become his enemy. We see in Lamentations, right? So, from the cross, Jesus quotes Psalm 22. He could have quoted some of these sections in Lamentations too, right? I mean, well, we'll just do 4 and 5 again, right? Remember I said, let's pay attention, listen for Jesus' passion in Lamentations, right? You can hear Jesus from the cross saying this, right? I mean, he doesn't. I'm not adding to it, but right, he's bent his bow like an enemy with his right hand set like a foe. He has killed all who are delightful in our eyes. Who's delightful in the eyes of the Father? Only Jesus, right? The Lord has become like an enemy. He has swallowed up Israel. Who's Jesus? He's Israel reduced to one, right? He's swallowed up, right? So we see that Jesus in this second day of the Lord, right? He very much, there's so many ways for us to think about what Jesus does on the cross, right? My whole Lenten series into Good Friday and Easter was about how Jesus is our champion fighting to defeat our enemies. Absolutely happens on the cross. Jesus lays down his life as a sacrifice to cover and atone for sins. Absolutely what happens on the cross. Another thing that happens on the cross is Jesus stands in between you dirty sinners, and God the Father with a cup of his wrath, saying, drink it. And Jesus steps in between and drinks it down. So when he hands the cup over to you, right, in the communion line, nothing left, right? It's an empty, the wrath has been used up on Christ, not on us, right? So this is another way for us to kind of understand what Jesus is doing and accomplishing on the cross. And who's it all for? It's all for you, right? He does it all for you. And again, some of the ways that we see Jesus hiding in the pages of Lamentations is we see Jesus taking the place of Jerusalem, right? It is not but for Christ's work on the cross that anyone is saved from the destruction of Jerusalem. Do you think everyone who died at the hands of the Babylonians in Jerusalem was an unbeliever? No. Probably not, right? Believers probably died. And so how are they saved?
Faith.
What was that?
With faith.
Faith in what?
Coming Christ. No?
Well done. No, everyone gets it wrong. You nail it, right? They are saved by faith in what Christ does on the cross. Now, they have no clue that that's what their faith is in, right? They get pictures and images, but this is something I say that everyone gets wrong. It's because we're in the Bible Belt. The Bible Belt gets this one wrong because of dispensationalism and other stuff like that. But, right, have you guys seen this, the bow tie model of salvation? How are people in the New Testament saved? By looking back with faith, towards the cross. How are people in the Old Testament saved? By looking forward in faith toward the cross. This is what all of Hebrews chapter 11 is about. Right? All those people who died in faith. It's faith in Christ, right? Their high priest who's coming. By the way, high priest is a whole other way to understand what Jesus is doing on the cross. But it's all, Jesus on the cross the whole time, right? Paul makes this point exceedingly clear when he talks about the effect of the law and those sorts of things. All right. This has been a good discussion of this, but we need to keep reading. Okay, we got through most of the questions I had on that section. The only other one I had is, what is the role of faith and prayer in such circumstances, right? Faith is kind of what David had there, right? That God is still a God of mercy, and prayer is, he's got big shoulders. You can yell at him. You're allowed to be mad at God, right? It can fall into sin. A lot of things can fall into sin. Recognize that, this is where Job came in my mind. Job, at the end, after huffing and puffing about how he wants to put God on trial, what does God say about Job?
He's more righteous.
More righteousness in all these things, he did not sin, right? Even as he's saying, God was unfair to me. I didn't deserve this. He's incorrect, but it's not sin, right? And he's still, right, it's that conversation towards God, right? I'll do 11 and 12, and I'll make you guys read the next big chunk here, right? So Jeremiah shifts from this general dirge into lament, right? My eyes are spent with weeping. My stomach churns. My bile is poured out to the ground. These are the destruction of the daughter of my people. Because infants and babies faint in the streets of the city. They cry to their mothers, "Where is bread and wine?" as they faint like a wounded man in the streets of the city, as their life is poured out on their mother's bosom, right? At the National Youth Gathering, I sat in on Dr. Lessing's class on Jeremiah, and he had this great kind of system, if you will, to deal with suffering in the world. And I know the first one was tears. He had hand motions for everything because of camp, I'm sure. Tears, time, and then I don't remember the order of the last two. Talk and Torah, right? Because they all start with the same thing.
What was the last one?
Torah, the Bible. But the Bible, well, I guess the starts with the T, but it doesn't feel the same. And he's an Old Testament guy. But this first aspect, which is where Jeremiah is right now here in this process, is tears. And I think, and we can talk more about it if you'd like, but an extended quote from the commentary I think is really good. So he's speaking of Jeremiah weeping here. And he says, tears bring us back to life. Tears awaken us out of our numbed stupor. Tears are God's gifts. Calm and cool heads have a place, but calm and cool heads do not work in every place. There are times and places when tears help us recover our humanity and open our hearts to God and others. They cleanse our spirits and release tension, fear, and anxiety. God preserves our tears and records them in a book. Lamentations is such a book for daughter Zion and for us. I think where this, I mean, I think this whole quote is really good. We spent a lot of time talking about it. But I think the question here, Jeremiah weeps for his people, right? Jesus weeps over Jerusalem. In the world that we exist in, have you wept for the world around you? Whether it be in all the ways that the news tells us that terrible and horrible things are happening, or, right, as Pastor Brighton, I don't think he was a doctor, the one down in Warner Robins, Pastor Jordan's pastor, would have said, you know, are you weeping over, you know, right, yeah. As he said in a conference.
David Brighton was your doctor?
Yeah. He said it in a conference, so he said he was still too afraid to say it in a sermon, so I don't know if he ever did. But he said, every day, thousands of people are going to hell and you don't care about it, right? That's a little bit more pointed than I'm going here. But, right, do you weep for the people that don't know Christ? And you don't necessarily have to have physical tears, but even those spiritual tears. And I think what Lessing does, it really kind of brought this to my mind, right? Tears help us recover our humanity, open our hearts to God and to others, right? This is how Christ sees the neighbors, or our neighbors, right? Is with these, with tears at suffering that is happening all around us. And I think, maybe it's just because I'm a man, but in the macho world, right, men don't cry. It doesn't happen. You get to cry at your wedding, maybe, unless you have too many good buddies, then you can't cry at your wedding, right? And then maybe if like a kid dies, then you're allowed to cry too. That's it. I think that's. I have an enormous amount of thoughts about that kind of thing, but for here, I think that idea that tears are always bad, especially among men, really strips us of humanity, and especially of being able to see the world in a Christ-like way. Right? Jesus weeps with his people regularly, right? Everyone knows 2 verses in the Bible. Right, John 3:16, and Jesus wept. They don't know anywhere, they have no clue where it is. Right, also in John, by the way. But they know Jesus wept. Right, I don't think that's a bad thing. I've often, by the way, because I make confirmands memorize their confirmation verse, and every year one of them says, "Can I pick Jesus wept?" And then I blow their minds by saying yes. And they go, "Oh, really?" And I say, "But you get a second bullet point to answer on your confirmation paper, which is, what is the law and gospel? In that verse, Jesus wept, right? And that removes it from all of their thinking, right? But I think we have a really good way to answer that, right? What's the law in Jesus wept? What was that? Oh, just the word wet? No. Because I think even wept has both law and gospel. Right? What's the law that is behind the verse? Jesus wept.
Laying in the tomb.
Yeah.
Jesus' friend is dead. That's not supposed to happen, right? Wages of sin is death, right? Jerusalem wasn't supposed to be destroyed, all right? But it was. It's the result of sin. There's the law. What's the gospel of Jesus wept? Just say Jesus. But it's also again, it's Jesus wept, right? Why does Jesus weep? It's not just because
He's human.
well, he's human. He cares,
Yeah.
right? He cares that Lazarus is dead, and he's not happy about it, right? And it's not just oh man, shucks, what a bummer. It wasn't supposed to be that way. It's I'm gonna fix this. Right?
And he cares for Mary and Martha when they say, Lord, have you been there? I think he's crying for them for the pain they've been through.
Oh, well, so absolutely. It's specifically, right, what is the direct cause of Jesus' tears?
Death.
Well, it's death, but it's when he sees the sisters and the other people mourning Lazarus. He sees the effects of death, right? That he is moved to tears. And so, oh, absolutely. I mean, he cares deeply. I talked about this recently, right? I don't know where it was. We got 10 minutes, and that's a tangent that's not relevant here because it's one of those Pastor Berlinski. It's a Jacob thought way back there. I'm not going to put the pastor title behind it. Anyway, good. So, for time, I'm just going to read through here. So from this weeping, Jeremiah now turns his attention. Jeremiah is still speaking, but he now speaks to Zion, right? He speaks to Jerusalem. So 13 through 19 here. What can I say for you? To what compare you, O daughter of Jerusalem? What can I liken to you that I may comfort you, O virgin daughter of Zion? For your ruin is vast as the sea. Who can heal you? Your prophets have seen for you false and deceptive visions. They have not exposed your iniquity to restore your fortunes, but have seen for you oracles that are false and misleading. All who pass along the way clap their hands at you. They hiss and wag their heads at the daughter of Jerusalem. Is this the city that was called the perfection of beauty, the joy of all the earth? All your enemies rail against you. They hiss and gnash their teeth. They cry, we have swallowed her. Ah, this is the day we longed for. Now we have it. We see it. The Lord has done what he purposed. He has carried out his word, which he commanded long ago. He has thrown down without pity. He has made the enemy rejoice over you and exalted the might of your foes. Their heart cried to the Lord, O wall of the daughter of Zion, let tears stream down like a torrent day and night. Give yourself no rest, your eyes no respite. Arise, cry out in the night at the beginning of the night watches. Pour out your heart like water before the presence of the Lord. Lift your hands to him for the lives of your children who faint for hunger at the head of every street. So, Jeremiah, what's Jeremiah's goal when he goes to address Jerusalem? 13 is where we get to see it most specifically. What does Jeremiah want to do?
Comfort them.
Jeremiah seeks to comfort, right? Up until now, Jerusalem has been alone, right? Everyone is enemies. Even God is an enemy to Jerusalem. Here we have Jeremiah walking alongside of Jerusalem to comfort her, right? The prophet that, right, I mean, we talked about this a little bit last week. If anyone could have said, told you so, right, it's Jeremiah. But that's not what he does, right? Instead, he walks alongside, right, the one who is in distress and seeks to comfort, right? And then in 14, we get to see the result of false prophets. I only mentioned it because I mentioned it earlier, right? Oh, yeah, you know, the prophets, false and deceptive visions, right? And then we see this kind of strange idea. They have not exposed your iniquity. Usually that's not a good thing, right? And the exposing Jerusalem is what God did with Babylon, right? But here, why is it a good thing? Or why would it have been a good thing if the prophets had exposed the iniquity of Jerusalem?
They could have asked for forgiveness.
Exactly. The false prophets are saying, don't worry about it. You're God's people. It's all good, right? Whereas the good advice would have been, you're not good. This is not okay, right? And then again, you know, those false and misleading oracles, right? What's the advice that Jeremiah gives to Jerusalem? 19 is where...
Lift your hands to him.
Yeah. I'm going to put it a little bit bluntly, knowing what comes next. Jeremiah says, yell at God, right? Again, we talked in chapter 1 that the lament, this is not a conversation with God, but it is still speaking to God. And so that's what Jeremiah is saying. He's saying, right, let your tears run and talk to God about this, right? And then let's see what, and Jerusalem takes that advice. The last thing Jerusalem says in the book, right? So this is what Jerusalem says. When Jeremiah says, lift up your voice, lift up your hands, and talk to God. Look, O Lord, and see with whom you have dealt thus. Should women eat the fruit of their womb, the children of their tender care? Should priest and prophet be killed in the sanctuary of the Lord? In the dust of the streets lie the young and the old. My young women and my young men have fallen by the sword. You've killed them in the day of your anger, slaughtering without pity. You summoned as if to the festival day my terrors on every side. And on the day of anger of the Lord, no one escaped or survived. Those whom I held and raised, my enemy destroyed. Jerusalem does not hold back, right? And again, we see that festival where Zion says, you gathered your people here so that you could kill them all, right? So you can slaughter them in the streets, right? The last words we have from Zion are accusations against God. Right? Let's see. I had it somewhere, but Jerusalem kind of says, God, this is what you've done, and you overdid it.
So, but God didn't kill everybody. Some were taken into exile.
Right. Yeah. So, yes, some are taken into exile. Some are left in the streets. Like, Jerusalem isn't a ghost town, right? The people that are left in the street are, the people that you see pushing shopping carts along the side of the road. They would have been the wealthiest people in Jerusalem, with who the Babylonians left. Anyone who had more than them, they killed or took, right? But not everyone is gone. It's significantly depopulated. This is, when Jerusalem is saying this, this is artistic imagery. And I think we, in the modern context, miss the fact that exile is, in the ancient world, often viewed as worse than death. You'll see this in the Roman society. It's elsewhere too, but in Rome, you get people who kind of fall out of favor with the Caesars or with the Praetorians or the Senate, and they know it's bad. And sometimes those people will just face whatever their sentence is, and they hope it's death. And they hope it's not exile. And others, because they fear that their sentence will be exile, commit suicide so that they aren't exiled, right? Because exile carries with it not only the equivocation of death, because you don't get to come, for the most part, you don't come back from exile. You're gone, and you're as good as dead to everyone, but it also carries with it enormous shame, which was something very important in the ancient world. It's still important in our world, not as much in our culture. In other cultures, it's more significant, although it's not devoid in our culture. Like, shame's still a big thing. But exile in the ancient world was often considered worse than death. In fact, you have Letters from a Stoic by Seneca the Elder. Seneca was exiled at one point. He gets exiled to like his beach house or veranda where he's going, but he does get exiled, and you have this person who used to be a senator, one of the wealthiest people in Rome, which is why he's exiled. He eventually comes back, and he has to claw and fight about why he came back from exile and why he's not just like the scum of the earth. He was restored, and people are still like, no, we have no use for you because you were exiled. And he wasn't, like I said, he got exiled to his private island. That wasn't even a bad one, right? But even still, someone who was like top of the upper crust of society still has to like deal with this after he's restored. That's how bad it was.
So did the Babylonians stay in Jerusalem after they got everything they wanted, or did they occupy it, or did they just pull out after they had everything?
So there are two invasions of Jerusalem. What the Babylonians did the first time, which is what they typically did, is they removed the ruling class, except for like one family. That was part of the royal family, but not, they're like the black sheep cousins. I don't know enough about English royalty to give you an example, right? But think like third or fourth cousin to the king, maybe that close. They kept them and said, guess what? You're in charge now. Remember who put you here, kind of deal, right? And, oh, by the way, this is how much you owe us annually in taxes, right? Because, this was pioneered by the Assyrians, picked up by the Neo-Assyrians, and the Babylonians and the Persians do it too, and Alexander does it. It's an extremely good way to conquer territory. And for the most part, in these situations, you don't change the religion, you don't change the culture, you just put in a new figurehead ruler. This is kind of what Herod is. It's not exactly the same, but Herod's in a similar vein. The Romans are doing other stuff with this too. And they're kind of developing it. And so that's what the Babylonians did. And then that guy, Jehoiachin, I think it is, when the Babylonians leave, he's like, so we're definitely not giving them money, right? We're going to get some alliances going, and then Babylonians come back and just level everything. Because they're like, you screwed up. That's not how this works. So what they would have done then is they would have installed a satrap, which is just a governor. But like in Daniel, all the satraps and satraps are just local, provincial, or they govern cities and the region around it. So they would have put in one of those kind of governors to kind of manage the territory and keep rebellions down and make sure tax money was going back to Babylon, which is not terribly. This isn't the only time that kind of thing happens, but even then, for the most part, you don't change much about the area. Jerusalem an example was made of them to the surrounding cities like Tyre and Sidon. It's like, don't you do what they just did. So I don't know exactly what happens in the intermediary time. Eventually, right, of course, under the Persians, the Jews get sent back with their own. Nehemiah is basically a satrap. Kind of. It's not exactly the same, but he basically gets installed as a satrap in Jerusalem. He's not the king, he's the governor, understanding that everything goes back to Darius. I think it was that. So, yeah, good.
I have a question, and you may have said this and I didn't catch it, but so when Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, were they taken out before the total destruction of Jerusalem, or do we have any idea of that?
Do you remember which exile they were in?
I think that was the very first.
Yeah,
they took all the elite families sort of hostage.
Oh, Tom, thank you.
I have this king's summary sheet that I made for a class one time.
I remember.
So the first wave was 605 BC, Jehoiakim and Daniel taken out.
Okay.
In those days. Then 598, 7 years later, Jehoiachin and Ezekiel taken out.
Right. Okay.
And then 587, so 11 years into that, Zedekiah and Jeremiah taken out.
Okay. So, okay. This happens.
3 waves.
Okay, I thought after this there were 3 waves. I just thought the third didn't involve.
However, Jeremiah, when he went to Babylon, he stayed in Jerusalem.
Right.
And went to Egypt.
Yeah. So there are multiple waves. And also there's multiple waves of return from exile too. Thank you, Tom. I'm glad you pulled that out. The history around here gets really complicated and extremely difficult to remember, quite frankly. But yes, thank you. So Daniel and then first wave. And they're listening to the prophets, right? Make a home for yourselves, right? Live in the land. That's where you're going. You're in timeout. It's a little bit more dramatic than that, but basically that's what's going on there. Good. Any other questions? All right. Let's close then with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. All right, thank you all. I will see you